Watch more programs like this on cable and stream with PCN Select. Subscribe at PCNTV.com.
We're joined today by Emma Horst-Martz. She is a campaign associate with PennPIRG, the Public Interest Research Group. For those that may not be familiar, can you explain what your organization does?
Sure. So PennPIRG is a statewide nonprofit organization, and we stand up to the powerful special interests that may threaten the public's health, safety, and well-being. So we do public education work, advocacy, we work with legislators to change policy, and just advocate for the public.
Your organization is representing hundreds of hospital repair technicians who are calling for the ability to repair equipment such as ventilators. Can you explain why they're sometimes unable to do so?
Sure. So this really came out of the Right to Repair movement, which is a movement that started about a decade ago, advocating that manufacturers should be required to provide the replacement parts and information and any sort of software diagnostic tools to fix devices. This can be applied to personal electronics like your cell phone, all the way to farming equipment like tractors, and in this case to hospital equipment. So the problem is that manufacturers of expensive hospital equipment like an MRI machine, or particularly relevant right now, ventilators to help people breathe, they often do not provide that service information and replacement parts or tools that a technician would need to fix the device, get it back into helping to save patients' lives. Now, they do this to make more money because the hospital has to call in a repair technician from the manufacturer to come and do the service for them. The problem with this is that hospitals have engineers and repair techs who are perfectly capable of doing these repairs themselves. They're often trained in the same sorts of backgrounds as the people from the manufacturers are, but they're not allowed to do those repairs, or they don't have access to the information they need to do that. So then it ends up just putting a further burden on the healthcare system. It increases patient waiting times, and it's more expensive.
What incentives or reasonings do manufacturers have to maintain proprietary information and withhold those repair manuals or equipment? Is it solely financial?
It is primarily financial, and they will argue that the information about how to repair a device like a ventilator is proprietary and they don't want to give out that information. But in reality, repair technicians are not interested in stealing the design of this technology. They simply want to do their jobs and get that machine working again to help patients.
You talked about a comparison a little bit about the financial burden. Can you roughly compare the cost, for example, of repairing a ventilator as opposed to having to purchase a new one?
Sure. So if you were to purchase a new item like this every time it died or needed some small fix, hospitals would spend probably hundreds of millions of dollars that they didn't need to. Now, this isn't really what's happening. In reality, a hospital doesn't just let an old machine go to die. They'll often cave and pay for those service fees from the manufacturer to come fix it for them. But again, this just puts an unnecessary burden on the whole system when it is very possible for the in-house technicians to perform those repairs. And just to give you a sense of the repair costs between a manufacturer versus doing it in-house, or even hiring a third party to do it for you for a smaller hospital that might not have their own set of engineers to do these repairs. In some cases, you can spend about 4% of the cost of the original device on repairs every year, and you multiply that over the years that you want to have that device working, it adds up to a lot of money. But if you call in the manufacturer to do those repairs, it can cost a significant amount more because you're not just paying for the replacement parts or the time that they're spending performing the repair in your hospital. You also have to pay for that technician to travel from another place. There aren't that many biomedical engineers or technicians for each of these companies. So if you have a machine go down one day, you could have to wait until the next day for that person to travel from out of state. You have to pay those travel expenses. And then, if they don't finish the job, they might have to go back and come back again the next day until it's complete. So it adds up really quickly, and it just saves everyone, including patients, a lot of time and money if they're able to perform that in-house or just have a choice of who is going to do the repair.
State Representative Austin Davis is sponsoring what they call right to repair legislation, which would require the manufacturers to release information on repair and maintenance details. Could you talk a little bit about this legislation and where it is in the process right now?
Sure. So I'm very excited to be working with Representative Austin Davis from the Pittsburgh area of Pennsylvania, and he is the primary sponsor of the Digital Fair Repair Act, which was introduced in April in the Pennsylvania House of Representatives. The bill is currently in the Commerce Committee, and we expect that it will move again when session starts again next fall. And it has bipartisan support with about 15 co-sponsors right now. The bill is not just about medical devices, although it does include that. It covers everything under the right to repair movement. So it would allow you to choose whether to take your cell phone to be fixed at the Apple store or by an independent repair shop, or if you have an engineer's mind, you would be able to do it yourself. And then this also applies to every other industry. So that could mean farmers would be able to fix their own tractors that need a digital code to access the software rather than calling in the manufacturer, which again can be pricey and take time, just like for hospital equipment.
Earlier this spring, there were concerns over whether or not there might be a national shortage of ventilators to address coronavirus-related needs. How are we keeping up nationally?
Nationally, it has been a struggle, and I think because we did the work to flatten the curve, I think a lot of hospitals are in a better position now, although we're seeing that curve go up again, unfortunately, this summer. I would say in some places, the lack of access to repair information was really difficult for hospitals to navigate all of the equipment shortages with ventilators. So normally a hospital doesn't use too many ventilators in a day-to-day situation, but because of the way this virus impacts the body, ventilators were in higher demand. And that meant these machines were coming out of storage. A lot of them needed to be maintenance before they could be used. You have to test the product to make sure that it's working properly before you use it on a patient. And a lot of smaller rural hospitals just did not have access to the replacement parts or the information they needed to perform these tests, which meant that ventilators were just sitting when they could have been helping people. And in fact, at PennPIRG, we work very closely with ISS Solutions, which is the independent repair branch of the Geisinger Hospital Network here in Pennsylvania. And because of the relationship that ISS has with repair companies and manufacturers of these machines, they were able to negotiate with the companies and get that repair information, and were able to get a number of ventilators into rural hospitals within a week. Now, if they didn't have that negotiating power, like a lot of hospitals do not, they wouldn't have been able to help those patients at the same speed, and it could have cost lives.
Does the fact that many states declared a public health emergency give elected officials any additional authority to force manufacturers to release such proprietary repair and maintenance information?
Unfortunately, I don't believe it gives legislators or state leaders any more authority to do that, but they do have the power to call on these companies to do the right thing. We have legislation pending in over 20 states around the country right now. But in the meantime, this pandemic has just revealed how urgent this issue really is. And that's why this group of over 500 repair technicians from across the country wrote in, signed this letter to send to their governors, including to Governor Wolf here in Pennsylvania, calling on them to put pressure on manufacturers to do the right thing and release repair information while we're in this crisis so that we can help patients at a better pace. That doesn't mean that the legislation that's pending goes away or becomes less important. That's a long-term solution. Right now, we need state leaders to call on these companies to help patients. And in some cases, companies have done the right thing and made repair information more available. But there are hundreds of different types of ventilators and medical equipment companies, so we need more of them to step up.
On behalf of PennPIRG, what are your next steps in terms of educating the public and advocating on behalf of these hospitals and hospital repair technicians?
So over the past couple months during the pandemic, we've been talking to hundreds of repair technicians from hospitals around the country and preparing a report that shows what sorts of limitations they're actually facing trying to repair devices like ventilators during the pandemic and what they would need to do that successfully with, total access to repair information and replacement parts. We are going to release the results of this study on Wednesday to inform the public and better educate elected officials about what we actually need to solve this problem.
Emma Horst-Martz is a campaign associate with PennPIRG, the Public Interest Research Group. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
We're joined today by York Mayor Michael Helfrich. York Council recently voted to extend the city's disaster declaration to the end of July. What's the significance of that move?
Well, thank you for having me, Francine. The significance is just we want to make sure that we're in position to recoup any kind of funds that we are expending during this emergency. We were active very early on prior to the pandemic even coming to York. We declared a state of emergency because we knew that we had to reconfigure what our employees were doing, and the declaration of emergency allowed us to do that.
How is York faring in terms of being able to receive state or federal aid at this point?
I think we're faring quite well. We got some money early on and we haven't expended that money. Luckily, we had all the pieces in place. Being one of only 10 bureaus of health in the Commonwealth, we already had the pieces in place to address the pandemic.
How has the coronavirus affected city finances?
Miserably. And I've talked with my fellow mayors across the Commonwealth, and it's very unfortunate. You can imagine with all the businesses closed, our business privilege and mercantile taxes are virtually nil. The employment taxes are low. So we're facing right now a known $2.3 million shortfall, or close to 5% of our budget. And that's just now. We know that we are going to continue to see issues going forward. Our businesses are not up to full capacity, full strength yet. And unfortunately, a study just came out of expected unemployment in the Commonwealth cities. And we know that we're going to be seeing a lot more unemployment than we have in recent past years.
Some city employees were furloughed earlier in the year. Do you have any anticipation of if or when they may be recalled at some point?
I don't want to speak on that just right now. We're examining what we can do. I was committed at the beginning to not furlough individuals until after the tidal wave at the unemployment compensation department had been dealt with. I did not want to have individuals not receiving paychecks from the city and not yet receiving paychecks from unemployment compensation. So we waited until much later than some of our other fellow cities and the county of York to take care of those employees. And then we are committed to keeping those furloughs at least as long as the stimulus money is there. But that gives us about 2 weeks right now where we are reevaluating what we're doing. That furlough only saved us about $330,000. And as I just mentioned, we are guaranteed a $2.3 million shortfall, and that's a very conservative number. So the furlough is not having had about a 14% impact on dealing with those expenses.
Now, you'd briefly referenced the city's businesses. Do you have any idea of the outlook for what recovery might look like in the months to come now that the county is green?
Well, I don't know that any of us do. We've seen, we had a couple of bad days here earlier in the week that were close to numbers that we were seeing during peak. And while our numbers are still relatively low for our population, we definitely are seeing a bit of a surge, not like some of the other states in the South, but we're definitely seeing some things that we're concerned about. So I don't want to make any predictions. I try to be prepared, but as Governor Wolf has said multiple times, it is the virus that really dictates what we do next. And unfortunately, we are at its mercy, and we are trying to implement what I call the 19th century types of precautions. We're the idea of socially distancing and wearing masks. It's not exactly 21st century technology there, but we also know it's the best thing that we can do right now. So I just keep encouraging that and try to support the businesses while also following the acts that improve our outlook.
How compliant have York businesses and residents been with complying with the governor's request to wear masks and socially distance and so forth?
I believe in the city of York, we've been much more compliant than, say, in the county of York, where there are movements for reopening that started when we were still in a strong peak. And also, we did here in the city of York, we actually we had our firefighters and our property maintenance inspectors out, making sure that our businesses that were supposed to be closed were closed. And that people are following the rules. So we're doing the best we can to balance that support of business with compliance with the rules.
How readily available is testing in York right now?
It is still, unfortunately, not available to those that, and this is to my knowledge, I could be corrected, but for instance, I've had some employees that were exposed to others, or their family members were exposed to others, and because they do not have symptoms, they're not able to get the testing that we need to ensure that they should be here at work with the rest of us. So I am concerned, and I'm not sure right now where those stipulations are coming from, whether they are from the Department of Health as they were early on, or really where they're coming from. But for us to really understand what is going on with this virus, we need broader testing, and we need to test people not just with symptoms, because as we all know, by the time you're showing symptoms, you've already possibly passed it on to somebody else.
At this point, are you confident that York health centers and hospitals are properly equipped with enough hospital beds and ventilators and so forth to meet the needs of potential coronavirus cases?
Absolutely, at the current rate. This is something that we've been keeping an eye on. I personally have kept a very close watch on these statistics using using our relationship with WellSpan, as well as Johns Hopkins statistics, the COVID Act Now websites, even the New York Times, and some of the reporting that they've been doing. These things have allowed us to keep a close eye on that, and I feel confident at the rates we are seeing, we are in good shape.
Mayor Michael Helfrich, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Francine. Thank you for having me.
We're joined today by Abbie Newman, CEO of Mission Kids. Due to the coronavirus, more people have been sheltering at home, which means some kids may be spending more time online. Have you found increased incidences of online child predators in recent months?
Yeah, actually, there have been reports to hits actually to I hate to say it, but child pornography sites buy more predators. So yes, and as a matter of fact, we've seen about a dozen suspected cases of child trafficking and commercial sexual crimes against children at Mission Kids in 2020 alone. And what happens is that kids are now home from school, they're not going to school. Schooling is even online, and so they're spending more and more time in front of computers. So yes, they are just ripe for predators to come after them and to try to find them.
What can parents do to help keep their kids safe?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's really important. So I think it's really important for parents to know what apps are your children using, what are they looking at online. Have your child sit down with you and walk you through what they're looking at online, what programs, apps on their phone. And then you can look with them and see what the privacy settings are. Make sure that they're set so that they can't be approached by strangers. Your children need to be really clear. They cannot speak to anybody who they don't know. And I say it that way because, okay, your kids will say, absolutely, I'm not going to speak to the creepy old guy that I see on my screen, Mom and Dad. But what happens is that predators don't come across that way. They will pose as children. And so children don't realize that they're not speaking to another child. A teenage girl may not realize that she's not actually speaking to this cute guy on the other side, but a creepy predator. So that is really important to make sure that your kids understand in no uncertain terms and why it's important as well.
What warning signs might indicate that your child may be being solicited by an online predator?
Yeah, that's really good. So you might think it's hard to tell. You know your child though, and you know if there are changes. Does your child suddenly have extra money or somehow come home with items that you don't really, how can they possibly afford, whether it's a new cell phone case or clothing? Are their nails suddenly done or more makeup? Now I know that we're not going out as much in these times, but there are a lot of deliveries that come to the house, so kids don't even necessarily have to go out for it. Are they suddenly closing the computer when you come into the room? Are they not letting you see what's going on? Do you hear new language? If your children are going out, if they're adolescents, are they coming home with tattoos? What happens is the traffickers will sometimes actually brand their victims with specific tattoos. I don't want to get everybody scared about, oh my God, my child has a tattoo. But something that maybe you didn't know that they were getting that's maybe shows a dollar sign or says something like daddy's girl. Those can be some signs that a child is being trafficked or groomed by a predator.
A child sex trafficking ring was recently uncovered in Chester County. Can you explain what happened?
Well, I listened to the news reports, and the best that I can understand is that they recovered 2 girls, one underage and 14 years old. The other, I'm not sure if she's 17 or 18. I've seen different reports. My understanding is that they were at least at a party in Washington, D.C. where they lived. They then went to Maryland of their own to go to a party there. They met somebody at that party, a woman, who said, "Do you want to earn some extra money? I can help you earn easy money." She seemed nice and friendly. They got in a car, voluntarily went with them, and then they end up at this very bad, terrible place in Chester County where now they are being held and they need to be performing sexual acts in exchange for money. There is no typical trafficking case, but that is really not an unusual story to be heard when you are fearful of adolescents being trafficked. They're approached by somebody who is not immediately identified as a pimp. This person may have been the woman that was soliciting them, may have been what's called a bottom girl, which is somebody who has worked for the pimp, has been trafficked usually by the pimp in the past, and now is recruiting. And that might be part of the way that she's repaying her debt to the pimp, is by bringing new girls into the trafficking ring. Go ahead. I was going to say, my understanding is that this girl used social media to get out of that ring, notified her parents and her friend, her mother and her friend on social media. I think that's fantastic, because usually, like we were just talking about, social media is used to lure the victims and the children into the trafficking. They use it to get out. I think that's great to turn the tables.
How do traffickers typically assert control over their victims?
Many different ways. Something like this, they could have gotten those girls up there and then said, okay, well, now you owe us money because we're putting a roof over your head. We're feeding you. You have no money? Well, you're going to have to turn these tricks. You're going to have to perform these sexual acts for money. Or they may get them addicted to drugs. And if they're addicted to the drugs, the trafficker may say, okay, fine, you're free to leave, but I'm not giving you your drug anymore. And then these girls end up, and I'm saying girls, it can be boys as well, but it's mainly girls, are addicted to drugs. They're withdrawing from drugs. And when you're what's called dope sick, you will do anything to get your next fix of drugs. They also make them feel like they are their family, that they care about them as opposed to anybody else in their life. And so it's a mind control game that they play and that they have over them as well. Those are usually the main ways that it can occur. Or they may just plain old physically beat them and hurt them.
What lessons can be learned from this case in Chester County?
Talk to your kids. Make sure that you know where your kids are. Understand that there are people in the community, the police, agencies like Mission Kids, victim services agencies, who will help you if you are a victim if you reach out to them. Parents can reach out for them. Talk to your kids, watch your kids, communicate with your kids, and don't be afraid to talk to them.
If you suspect that someone is a victim of trafficking, what can you do?
Okay. Trafficking is a form of child abuse. So you can certainly call the Pennsylvania Child Abuse Hotline for that. That number is 1-800-932-0313. You can also call your local police department or your county detectives. You can call the National Human Trafficking Hotline. That number is 1-888-373-7888. Or you can even send a text to Polaris, another national organization, and text BEFREE, B-E-F-R-E-E.
What is Mission Kids' role in stopping human trafficking?
We provide education. What Mission Kids does is we facilitate team responses to human trafficking in Montgomery County. We also provide education on anti-human trafficking as well as child sexual abuse. So when children, when there are suspected victims of child abuse and victims who have been trafficked, the police and children and youth will bring that child to Mission Kids. And we will help form a new safety net around this child to help them get through trafficking and to support them and to help them tell their story in their own words. We do that for all suspected victims of child abuse. And we also provide education in the community. If anybody is interested in education on human trafficking or child abuse, please feel free to contact us, www.missionkidscac.org.
Abbie Newman serves as CEO for Mission Kids. Thank you for joining us once again.
Thank you so much for having me, Francine. I appreciate it.